Most people think a promotion is proof that you are winning, proof that your career is working, proof that somebody important looked at you and decided you deserve to move up one more rung. I have never trusted that kind of proof. Very much the world loves visible progress because visible progress is easy to admire. A bigger title, a larger office, more direct reports, a cleaner line on the resume. These things photograph well. They also destroy a great many lives, not in one dramatic explosion, much more quietly than that. A person gets promoted out of the work he is good at and into the work he is merely flattered by. For a while he still looks successful, then he becomes tired, then he becomes irritable. Then he becomes political because politics is what people often use when competence stops carrying them. Then one day he is sitting in a room he does not enjoy, performing a role he never should have taken, telling himself that at least the title sounds respectable when his old classmates look him up online. That is a terrible trade. And it happens constantly. The reason it happens is that people confuse promotion with appreciation. Those two things are not the same. A business can appreciate in value without changing its essential nature. A farm can become more valuable while remaining a farm. A great company can become more valuable while still doing the same economically sensible things. A career often does not work that way. When you move up, you are not always becoming a more expensive version of the same thing. Very often you are entering a different game entirely. That is the point most people miss. They think the ladder is vertical. It often is not. It is usually a genre change disguised as a raise. A wonderful engineer becomes a mediocre manager. A world-class salesperson becomes a poor coach. A brilliant analyst becomes a bureaucrat with a calendar problem. A surgeon who should be in the operating room ends up trapped in administration, where everyone loses except perhaps the person who likes calling meetings. The mistake is not that organizations promote. The mistake is that they promote based on evidence from the current role, while pretending that evidence transfers automatically into the next role. Sometimes it does, often it does not. That is why I want to talk to you about one of the most misunderstood ideas in professional life. The Peter Principle, people treat it as a joke because it is uncomfortable. It should not be treated as a joke. It is one of the most useful pieces of career arithmetic ever observed. The idea is simple enough that you can explain it to a child and deep enough to quietly explain half the corporate misery in America. A person is good at his job because he is good at it, he gets promoted, then he learns the next job and becomes good at that one. So he gets promoted again. This process repeats until he reaches a role for which he is not naturally suited. Maybe the skills are different, maybe the pressure is different. Maybe the work no longer resembles the thing that made him valuable in the first place. He begins to underperform at that point. The promotions stop. But he usually does not get sent back down. He just stays there, installed permanently at the level of his incompetence. That phrase sounds cruel. It is often just descriptive. People do not usually land there because they are lazy or stupid. They land there because success in one role was treated as evidence of success in a very different role. That is not the same thing. And once you see this clearly, you begin to understand why so many organizations feel like museums of misapplied talent. The system is not always selecting the best people for the next task. It is selecting the best performers at the current one, then hoping the new job will somehow reward the same wiring. Hope is not a management system. Let me make this concrete. Imagine a software engineer. He writes clean code. He sees architectural problems faster than others do. He finds elegant solutions where other people create mess. He can sit with a hard technical problem, turn it over slowly, and eventually make something efficient and durable out of it. That is real talent. The company notices naturally. It wants to reward him, so it promotes him to engineering manager. Now the work changes. He is no longer paid mainly to solve technical problems. He is now paid to resolve conflict, write reviews, coach weaker performers, negotiate timelines with product managers, explain trade-offs to executives, carry administrative nonsense, defend budgets, sit in meetings, and absorb the emotions of a team. That is not the same game. It may be a more prestigious game inside the company. It is not the same game. And because it is not the same game, success in one does not imply joy or competence in the other. The company has now taken its best engineer and converted him into an uncertain manager. It lost a specialist and gained an amateur. Everyone tells themselves this is upward mobility. Quite often, it is just value destruction in formal clothing. The same pattern appears in sales. A great salesperson often has qualities that do not translate well into managing salespeople. He may be aggressive. He may be intensely self-directed. He may hate process and love closing. He may run on personal energy, individual pressure, and a slightly selfish competitive streak that is very useful when convincing customers to say yes. But managing a sales team is different. Managing requires patience, teaching, coaching, planning, fairness, the ability to help 10 people get better rather than using your own gifts to beat everyone around you. These are different muscles. A person can possess both sets. Many do not. That is not a moral failing. It is a category error. And we actually have data on this, which is one reason the subject deserves more seriousness than people give it. Researchers studying promotions across hundreds of firms looked at a large sample of salespeople and sales managers and found something deeply revealing. The strongest predictor of who got promoted into management was current sales performance. That sounds reasonable until you examine what happened after those promotions. The better the individual had been at selling, the worse the team often performed under him as manager. That is not because top sellers are bad people. It is because the organization was using one skill to predict another. The two were related in title only. This finding should make every ambitious person pause. The world keeps telling you that if you are winning your current game, you should keep leveling up indefinitely. That is childish thinking. In reality, leveling up often changes the task so completely that the next role stops rewarding the thing that made you special. The sales data revealed something else important. The people who made the strongest managers were not always the ones with the flashiest individual numbers. They were often the people who had shown collaborative strength, the ability to support complex deals, and the kind of social skill that makes others more effective. Those qualities do not always shout. Organizations are often seduced by what shouts. That is another old story. They reward the visible metric and neglect the quieter one more predictive of success in the next seat. Then they act surprised when the promoted star does not actually improve the system. Now let me add another layer, because the trap is even uglier than it first appears. Promotions are often awarded after peak periods. A person has a fantastic year. He crushes his targets, he lands the whale client, he gets lucky timing in a strong market, or perhaps all of the above. That is usually when the organization decides he is ready. But peak performance is often a combination of skill and good conditions. Once the conditions normalize, his results naturally drift back toward the mean. That is just statistics. So the person gets promoted at the top of a very flattering moment and then has to perform in a harder role without the same tailwinds. To the organization, it looks like he suddenly declined. Often he did not decline. The company simply selected him at his peak and moved him into a job that required different muscles at precisely the moment his visible results were likely to cool. Anyway, it is almost a perfect machine for manufacturing disappointment. This is why I tell people to stop imagining their career as a clean ladder. It is not. It is much closer to a graph. On the vertical axis is competence. On the horizontal axis is job level. At the beginning, the line rises, you are new, you learn, you get better. Then you hit a zone where the tasks fit your temperament, your cognitive style, your strengths. You are in your element. This is where your line is high and strong. You may stay there for years and produce enormous value. But if the roles keep moving upward while your own natural competence curve eventually bends downward, you will hit a point where each promotion reduces rather than increases your real effectiveness. That point is what I call the Peter zone. It is where prestige keeps rising while utility starts falling. And the wicked joke is that society often celebrates your entry into that zone. You get congratulations, you update the title. People tell you how proud you should be. Nobody asks the only question that matters. Does the new role fit the strongest version of you? That is the only question. Not does it pay more. Not will people be impressed. Not will your mother understand it more easily. Not will former classmates envy you. Will this role put me in a game where my best qualities compound, or will it force me to abandon the field on which I am most valuable? If you never ask that, you are not building a career. You are participating in a status auction. Status auctions are expensive. This brings us to the part where rational people should become especially careful. The promotion decision is not merely a question of money. It is a question of expected utility. That phrase sounds academic, but it describes real life very well. A promotion has benefits, more salary, a larger title, a higher ceiling perhaps, but it also has costs, stress, loss of craft, loss of autonomy, loss of time, loss of identity, risk of failure, risk of hating the work itself. Those costs are not imaginary. Yet people routinely ignore them because salary is visible and stress is not always priced until later. That is how they end up making bad trades while telling themselves they were being ambitious. I have always liked simple arithmetic in places where other people get emotional. Suppose a promotion gives you 20% more pay. That sounds attractive. Now suppose it also gives you 6 more hours of meetings a week, turns your best skill into your least used skill, pushes you into interpersonal conflict you do not handle. Well, makes you dread Monday, reduces your energy at home, and increases the probability that you will fail visibly enough to become expendable. Was that a good trade? Many people say yes because the number on the offer letter is larger. I say not necessarily. If happiness falls, competence falls, and job security eventually falls, then the extra salary may be one of the worst bargains you ever accepted. A rational investor would never evaluate a security by return alone while ignoring risk. Yet millions of workers evaluate promotions that way every year. They see the upside and refuse to mark the downside. That is not mature career thinking. That is greed with a corporate logo. For many people, the highest utility zone is not management. It is senior individual contribution. That is another idea the culture struggles to respect. We still think like factory hierarchies. We assume that moving upward means moving away from the work and toward control of the people doing the work. But in many modern fields, the most valuable person is not the one managing 10 average contributors. It is the one truly exceptional contributor who produces at a level others cannot touch. The best designer, the best closer, the best coder, the best surgeon, the best troubleshooter, the person who can still mentor, still influence, still shape outcomes, but does not have to spend his days filling out forms about people who are not his comparative advantage. That person can be worth far more than the manager above him. Unfortunately, many organizations have compensation ladders that still treat management as the only respectable path to a meaningful raise. That is not a law of economics. It is a design choice. And if your company insists the only way to make materially more money is to stop doing the thing at which you create the most value, then one of two things is true. Either the company is poorly designed or you are in the wrong company. That is a useful thing to know because then the rational move may not be to say yes to the promotion. The rational move may be to say no, stay in the skill zone, and either negotiate a stronger individual contributor path or take your talent to a place that understands how value is actually created. That is not giving up. That is strategic stagnation, if you want to use the provocative phrase. I rather like it. Strategic stagnation sounds like laziness to people who still think careers are ladders. In reality, it is often intelligent compounding. I would much rather spend 10 years becoming the undeniable master of something economically valuable than spend 10 years collecting titles while becoming mediocre at a series of increasingly political jobs. Titles do not compound nearly as well as mastery. The market eventually pays for mastery. The ego pays for titles immediately and often collects later in regret. You can see this in almost every profession if you look honestly enough in medicine. A superb clinician may be pushed toward administrative leadership, where the job becomes compliance, scheduling, departmental conflict, and budget management rather than diagnostic brilliance in law. A talented litigator or deal maker may become a practice group manager and spend less time winning cases and more time performing internal diplomacy. In academia, the scholar who loves inquiry becomes a department chair and slowly drowns in committee work. In journalism, the great reporter becomes an editor, then a manager of editors until one day he is managing process rather than uncovering truth. In design, the person who sees product beauty becomes a manager of roadmaps and stakeholder alignment. The same pattern keeps repeating. The institution sees excellence. It wants to reward excellence. It assumes the reward should be a move upward. The move upward changes the activity. The activity no longer fits the original excellence. Soon the institution has weakened the place where real value was being created. This is not a criticism of all management. Good management is extraordinarily valuable. A great manager can multiply the output of dozens of people. The point is not that management is unimportant. The point is that management is its own craft. It deserves respect precisely because it is not automatic. Some people are natural managers in the deepest sense. They clarify chaos, they coach without smothering, they improve others. They absorb pressure elegantly. They organize without deadening creativity. They make the team bigger than the sum of its parts. Wonderful. Promote those people, pay them, keep them. Just do not assume the strongest operator or producer is secretly also one of those people. Because his current metrics are excellent, that assumption is expensive. There is another hidden cost to the wrong promotion. You do not only lose effectiveness, you often lose the joy that made your best work possible in the first place. A person who loves the work itself can produce a kind of energy that outsiders often underestimate. He is not merely earning, he is playing on his home field that matters. Once you move him into a role he does not love, he may still perform adequately for a while. Adequately is a poor substitute for brilliance. And if he is conscientious, he may stay too long, because conscientious people often interpret unhappiness as something they should overcome, rather than as useful data about fit. That is another trap. The culture tells us that discomfort must be growth. Sometimes discomfort is just misalignment. There is a difference between stretching your capabilities and abandoning your comparative advantage. The first can be healthy. The second is often a very expensive attempt to look ambitious. So how do you know whether a promotion is legitimate stretch or career misallocation? You start by doing a task audit, not a title audit. This is where most people go wrong. They hear the new title and immediately imagine the social meaning of it. Stop doing that. Write down the actual weekly work. How many hours will be spent building, solving, designing, selling, coding, writing, or otherwise operating in your strongest domain? How many hours will be spent coordinating, reviewing, managing personalities, sitting in meetings, traveling internally, reporting upward, smoothing conflict, and doing all the things organizations call leadership but which may or may not fit you? Until you do that, you are not evaluating a job. You are evaluating a fantasy. A title is a fantasy. A calendar is the truth. Look at the calendar. Then do an energy audit. What kinds of work leave you stronger after doing them? What kinds of work drain you? Not in the childish sense that all hard work is tiring. I mean in the deeper sense, which tasks make you feel more alive, more focused, more capable, more yourself? Which ones make you smaller, slower, more performative, more fake? You must know this. No one else can know it for you. A person who keeps choosing work that is slightly wrong for him can build a perfectly respectable career and still feel increasingly estranged from himself. That is not success in any language I respect. Then do a failure radius audit. If I take this promotion and it goes badly, what exactly happens? Do I lose only the role? Do I lose the culture I liked? Do I become the obvious person to cut in a downturn? Do I become separated from the craft I built my identity around? Do I lose political capital? Because I said yes to something I was never equipped to handle? Do I become trapped because the organization now sees me as a weak manager instead of a strong specialist? That last risk is real and people rarely price it properly. When you leave your zone of mastery and enter a role where you look merely average or worse, the organization may stop remembering what made you special before. You have not only risked future joy, you may have risked reputation. That deserves respect. Now let us come back to the practical problem. Suppose you have done the task audit, the energy audit, and the failure radius audit, and you decide that the promotion is wrong. How do you decline intelligently? First, never frame it as fear. Frame it as return on talent. That is the right language. You are not saying I do not want to grow. You are saying I know where the company gets the highest return on my abilities. That is a much stronger position. A good conversation sounds something like this. I am honored by the confidence. I have thought carefully about where I create the most value here, and I believe my strongest contribution is still in the work itself. I would like to deepen that contribution, take on harder projects, mentor junior people, and own more complex outcomes. But I do not believe moving fully into people management is the highest return use of my abilities right now. Can we discuss a path where compensation and influence rise without requiring that shift? That is a power move, though people misunderstand why. It is powerful not because it is rebellious. It is powerful because it is self-aware. Self-awareness is rare enough in organizations that people often experience it as confidence. And it is confidence, just not the loud type. It says, I am not desperate to be validated by a title. I know what game I am good at, and I am not going to abandon it merely because the organization has a default script for rewarding me. If the company responds intelligently, wonderful. You may build the exact kind of career that compounds best. If the company responds badly and says management is the only path to more pay, then you have learned something valuable. You may be in a place that does not understand specialist value. That is not always fatal, but it is information. And information should change behavior. Perhaps you stay for other reasons. Perhaps you leave and sell your strength elsewhere. Either way, you are now acting from knowledge instead of drifting upward in search of applause. There is also a way to say yes selectively without falling into the trap. Some promotions are salvageable if they can be redesigned. Perhaps you keep direct technical work in your week. Perhaps you manage a small group first instead of a large one. Perhaps you retain client ownership while mentoring rather than move entirely into administration. Perhaps you negotiate explicit time carved out for the work you are actually best at. What matters is not whether the organization calls it a promotion. What matters is whether the substance of the role preserves your economic advantage. Substance over ceremony. That is a useful rule in almost everything. The modern career world is full of ceremony announcements, titles, badges, panels, hierarchy theater. Very little of that necessarily tells you where the money, the joy, or the long-term utility really live. I have always preferred to look underneath. Career utility lives in fit, skill compounding, economic value, time structure, and psychological durability. Everything else is secondary. This is one reason I tell people to stop comparing their path too much to friends and peers. Comparison is especially poisonous in the promotion question. Your friend may be made for management, you may not. He may love ambiguity, politics, people energy, and organizational chess. You may love solving hard technical problems in peace. Wonderful. Why should one of you envy the other? The envy comes because we still treat hierarchy as a universal scoreboard. It is not. Two people can both be winning while standing on different rungs or even on different ladders entirely. That is maturity. Immaturity says one title is inherently more adult, more successful, more meaningful than another. Markets do not pay maturity in moral points. They pay for value creation. If a senior specialist creates more value, more stability, more durable economics, and a better life for himself than a bad manager with a shinier title, then who exactly is losing? Only the person addicted to outside scorekeeping would think the specialist lost. That brings me to a broader principle I have trusted all my life. Do not let social proof make expensive decisions for you in investing. Following the crowd often leads to overpaying in careers. Following the crowd often leads to misfit. People see the path others are taking and assume the path must be right because it is common. Common is not the same as wise. Many common paths are merely common mistakes repeated with enough confidence to look respectable. The latter is one of them. Everyone assumes the right answer is always upward because up is easy to explain. Sideways into a better fit is harder to explain. Downward in title but upward in utility is harder to explain. Staying where you are while extracting more value from the same zone is harder to explain. Good harder to explain often means less crowded. Less crowded often means more rational. If I had to tell you the deepest reason people take the wrong promotion, it would not be money. It would be insecurity. They need the external signal. They need proof that they are moving. They need a symbol large enough to reassure themselves that they matter. That is a very expensive appetite. Because once you start making career moves mainly to feed insecurity, you will keep buying things that do not fit you simply because they flatter you. That is a terrible habit. The world will always offer more chances to look important than to become quietly excellent. Choose excellence. Quietly excellent people often end up building strange economic power over time. They become difficult to replace. They develop judgment others rely on. They acquire leverage without always acquiring public noise. They may not look like the winners at year 3. They often look much stronger by year 15. That is compounding. Compounding in careers looks like this. The right work done for a long time by the right temperament in the right environment begins to create a moat. The person gets better. The reputation deepens. The economic value rises. The stress remains tolerable because the work fits. That combination is rare. Do not abandon it lightly. Titles do not compound in the same way. Titles often reset. A new title gives a brief emotional boost and then becomes normal. Then the person needs the next one. That is hedonic adaptation in a blazer. It is one of the least discussed traps in professional life. The person climbs not because the work is getting better, but because the old title stopped anesthetizing his insecurity. No title can solve that. Only self-knowledge can. So here is my blunt conclusion. The smartest person in the room is not always the one who climbed the highest. Very often it is the person who figured out where his competence curve actually peaked, what kind of work made him most alive and most valuable, and then had the discipline to build there instead of wandering upward into prestige. Shaped mediocrity, that person may decline a promotion. He may negotiate a specialist track. He may leave for a better design firm. He may look less glamorous in the middle. I do not care. He is maximizing utility, not vanity. That is how adults should play the game, if you want the shortest version. Remember this, promotion is not automatically appreciation. A raise is not automatically a win. A better title is not automatically a better life. The next rung may not be the next level of the same game. It may be an entirely different game, one you are badly built for. Know the difference. Audit the work, not the label. Separate the pay from the role. Understand your competence curve. And if the numbers tell you the promotion is a trap, have the courage to say no. That no may be the most profitable word in your whole career. Not because it is dramatic, because it preserves the place where your value actually compounds. That is all I ever really try to do with capital. This is no different. Your talent is capital. Allocate it where it earns the highest return. Do that long enough, and you will not only make more money, you will keep more of yourself. That is the only promotion I have ever trusted.